Hello everyone, today I thought we'd take a look together at the tribe in Polytopia that is possibly even more misunderstood than either Polaris or Hudrick, and we'll analyse how to play the tribe optimally to improve your gameplay. This tribe, as eagle-eyed viewers may already have deduced, is Elyrion. This woodland tribe is multifaceted and has a lot of different aspects to it, but the aspect on which we'll focus first is Polytors. In the early game, Elyrion have access to the forest magic tech, which allows them to spend 2 stars to replace any animal, of which they are guaranteed at least 2, with a Polytor, basically a high damage but low defense swordsman equivalent. This allows for a speed of expansion unrivaled even by Umaji if the player using the Polytors is using the boosting strategy. Boosting is a simple tactic to get to grips with. Placing a unit on a tile where another unit is about to be spawned allows the unit that is on top to be moved again, as it is pushed out of the way by the newly spawned unit, in this case the Polytor. This tactic means that your starting warrior is able to move 2 squares on the first turn, similar to the effect observed when a giant is spawned in a city underneath an existing unit. However, I would advise against spawning 2 Polytors on the first turn. This is for the simple reason that researching an economic tech on turn 1 is incredibly useful. As for the specific tech which the player should research, Elyrion for some strange reason have a high farm spawn, so organisation is always a good bet to prepare farming. However, if there is insufficient fruit to level up your capital at least once, then it's likely you will have to switch plans to researching fishing and or forestry. Of course, forestry is a useful tech to the forest tribe, but it does require more time to accumulate the stars to research forestry, due to it being a tier 2 technology. One other tool the Elyrion player has in their arsenal is the ability to build sanctuaries once forestry has been researched. Sanctuaries attract an animal that can be enchanted into a Polytor unit once every 3 turns, and provide a star per turn for every adjacent animal. These buildings are something I have mixed feelings about. On one hand, the Sanctuary can bring in more Polytors to be converted into a cheap but effective mid-game army, and can provide some revenue from non-enchanted animals. On the other hand though, Sanctuaries are expensive and require a good deal of land to function. In the end, use them if you wish, but I would suggest being sparing with them. An endless horde of cheap units in Polytopia tends to be an ineffective strategy, compared to the more measured strategy of levelling up cities and then building stronger units, and lumber huts are an excellent way to ensure your cities are levelled up. Speaking of levelling up cities, Elyrion's main weakness comes from their inability to hunt animals and thus reduced economic power. To counteract this, I suggest a strategy of measured aggression that involves researching 1 or 2 economic techs early on, and then going on the offensive with Polytors and attempting to capture lots of cities and villages. A further advantage you'll have is that you'll not need to waste time uncovering ruins behind the fog, as you already have the capacity to see ruins even when hidden under the fog of war. Or, as always, prioritise levelling up cities to level 2 or level 3 first, and take mostly stars in workshop to get your economy going. As for your mix of units, warriors and Polytors will be the primary drivers of your early game expansion. Later on, you will need to research riding and roads for a very specific reason pertaining to Elyrion's super unit. The unique super unit that Elyrion has is the Dragon, and building a road network between all of your many cities should allow you to get 1 or 2 of them within a reasonable number of turns in your capital. The reason this is so important is because although the Dragon is an excellent super unit, it takes quite some time to grow and develop into a fire dragon, 6 turns in all. You cannot research that the dragon will die during this time, and thus the Elyrion player would do well to research defenders alongside farming in the middle game in order to defend dragon eggs and hold together what will in all likelihood be a reasonably large empire by this point. Alongside dragons and defenders, all Elyrion players will already have researched forestry by the middle game as I mentioned earlier, and therefore mathematics is a natural choice to accompany the existing Elyrion armies into the endgame. Sawmill spots will have to complete with sanctuary spots, however it is worth noting that there is one more situation in which the Elyrion player should prioritise rapid city upgrades, and this relates to the only unit not yet discussed in this video. The Navalon is Elyrion's frankly terrifying amphibious knight equivalent that you saw in the intro clip. Requiring only 5 chanced stars to enchant, the Navalon seems like an easy recommendation. However, the Navalon replaces the whale and thus requires the player to research the whaling equivalent tech for Elyrion, water magic. This is in addition to requiring all cities on the coast, or at least a good deal of them, to take border growth to actually get a whale in your territory in the first place. Once researched and enchanted, however, this is never long can stand in for the vast majority of your navy together with dragons on dry maps. However, on maps with a little more water such as Archipelago and Waterworld, the player may well need to research navigation in addition to sailing and fishing for a full navy. It is worth considering, of course, that no player with much experience whatsoever, let alone a player playing Semanti or Polaris, will let you destroy their whole fleet in only a single Neverlong chain. Now, one further thing I wanted to discuss in relation to Elyrion, which has become somewhat of a tradition at this point, is how Elyrion matches up to other tribes and technologies. Now, Elyrion, when playing against a regular tribe like, say, Jinji or Imperius, does tend to have the advantage early on, and that's especially the case if that tribe is not a turn 0 tribe. So referring specifically to stuff like Jinji, Aimo, not so much Quetzali and Vengir, because they tend to have quite aggressive technologies, or in Quetzali's case defensive, that allow them to be strong in combat early on, and the same deal goes for Umaji really, although Umaji's riders are really quite easy to take out with only a single Polytor hit. But your primary targets early on should be tribes like, say, Jinji, as I said, Aimo, perhaps potentially Yadak. I would not personally target any turn 0 tribe unless it's very early on in the game, because quite often they're going to have an economy that's superior to yours, and they're going to be able to overwhelm you fairly quickly if you can't besiege their capital within the first couple of turns, and that's nearly always impossible unless you have quite a large amount of Polytors, and you simply just won't have the economy to keep the fight going for so long, considering you won't have forestry yet, you won't be able to build any sanctuaries, and you won't be able to build any units besides warriors and maybe a couple of Polytors right at the very start of the game. So you should be very careful with your Polytors. Make sure you don't throw them straight into combat where they're just going to get hit, in the same way you wouldn't do that with a knight. And what else you would do with your Polytors is make sure that when you're attacking an opponent, you're attacking them in such a way that causes the maximum amount of damage. So if they have an archer, a rider and a warrior all sitting next to each other, your primary targets are going to be that archer, they're going to be the rider. Do not target the warrior because it tends to have a higher defense stat and a lower attack stat, and of course lower mobility and lower range. So you want to target your opponent's most valuable targets that aren't going to retaliate a great deal. And of course, the same applies to attacking with any unit really, but it's especially pertinent to the Polytor because the Polytor is a very valuable attacking unit, but on defense it tends to be a much weaker unit. As regards specifically combat with, say, Vengir or Quetzali, I would say you should take advantage of the fact that Elyrion have a pretty strong economy with their plus farm spawn, and you're going to want to stay back from them. Don't let them attack you too much. If they come in your territory, then you're going to spawn Polytors at the sort of pop-up army, if you like. And this is where Sanctuaries can actually come in quite useful, because when someone's coming into your territory, you can spawn a bunch of Polytors and sort of surround them. And even if they attack one or two of your Polytors, right, it's costing you only 2 stars to spawn each one, and the others are going to be able to attack the enemy quite heavily. This obviously doesn't necessarily apply to Vengir right in the beginning of the game, because swordsmen are just a level above even Polytors in terms of strength, but beware that Vengir, rather than Elyrion, are a tribe that really they'll run out of their strength fairly quickly because they won't be able to level up their capital as quickly as someone like Bard or a Kiku can. And as regards Kiku specifically, I would say they are going to be one of your threats that you'll deal with later on in terms of Navalons, if you don't get to attack them straight away, because they are a turn 0 tribe, and they will be able to quickly build quite a few warriors, whereas you will still be spamming from a level 1 city, which tends to be a recipe for disaster in Polytopia if you're not quite sure what you're doing. You want, where possible, to have your cities level up, you want to have a fair number of cities, and you want to get only those technologies that you need early on, and then in the middle game and the end game you can start to research technologies that aren't so essential. I've already gone over the sort of techs that are relevant to Elyrion, but generally you're going to want to put off riding a little longer than you would with most tribes. You're going to want to go straight away with the economics, because you'll be lagging behind in that, and then just expand. Expand your empire, and this should generally be a reasonably effective tribe. However, as always when I'm discussing these, I'm going to have to include the caveat that this is a strategy that will only really apply if you know the basics of Polytopia, things like how to conduct a night chain, because that also applies to Navalons, things like how to research technologies and generally in what order, although it does change slightly for Elyrion. Things like which city upgrades to choose, though, again, I have touched on that. Things like which units to attack with first, which units to place behind other units, and all of this is sort of a basic line of strategy, and this is the kind of thing you can pick up basically just from experience. So that's why I highly recommend you get out there, you pick up this fun tribe if you haven't already, and it's totally worth it, and I suggest you have a go at playing this tribe, and, well, trial and error will get you much further than watching a video ever could, although I hope you've gained something from watching this nonetheless. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Until then, goodbye.